That ridge is functionally part of our community, Mr. Voss, and those structures on it fall under board. Review whether you like it or not. That was Dana Pruitt, president of the Cedar Hollow Homeowners Association, for 6 years running, standing at the bottom of my access road in white sneakers that had never seen gravel before that morning. She was pointing up the slope at my tower. Not the cameras she had bolted to my fence posts 3 weeks earlier. Without asking, the tower? The lattice steel relay tower that has stood on the high point of my 40 acres since before Cedar Hollow was a line on anybody's plat map. What Dana did not know, what she never once thought to check in 2 years of letters and fines and clipboard visits, was that I am the man who holds the recorded easement that every cable and conduit serving her entire subdivision runs through, including the fiber feed her brand new security cameras were quietly uploading to. If you found a stranger's camera zip-tied to your own fence aimed at your own front door, what would you have done first? I am 61 years old. For 34 years, I worked as a telecommunications field engineer, the man they sent up the towers in ice storms to splice the lines back together when a whole county went dark. I retired 6 years ago to the 40 acres my wife Carol and I bought back in the early 90s. A long shelf of pine and granite above a valley that has slowly filled in, with cul-de-sacs and beige houses. Carol passed 4 years ago. Cancer, fast and unfair. She is buried at the edge of the meadow, under a flat stone I cut and set myself. And from that stone, you can see the tower. And that matters to this story more than it might sound like it does right now. My son Eli lives with me. He is 17, a senior, all elbows and quiet, and he is better with a soldering iron than I was at his age. The two of us and an old blue heeler named Dot are the whole household. I want to tell you up front how this ended, because the engine of this story is not whether I won. I want you to know, I won. And I want you to spend the next 40 minutes watching how a woman who never read a single recorded document talked herself into a hole she could not climb out of. I have a manila folder on my workbench, soft at the corners now, labeled in Carol's old habit of block letters. Inside that folder is the thing that ended Dana Pruitt's career as a self-appointed sheriff of other people's land. She walked past the answer 100 times. She never asked. The 40 acres sit above the Cedar Hollow development, the way a hawk sits above a field. When Carol and I bought the parcel, the valley below was hay ground and one dairy barn. The deed we signed came with something most buyers would have skimmed past: a recorded utility easement running back to 1961, granting the parcel owner a permanent corridor for communication and power infrastructure across the ridge, and granting that same owner the right to host and maintain relay equipment serving the valley below. Previous owner had been a regional phone cooperative. They built the tower in '63. When the cooperative dissolved, the tower and the easement and the obligation to maintain the corridor passed with the land. To me, I knew exactly what I was buying. I had spent my whole career around equipment like that. Carol used to say, I bought the view, and the marriage came with a radio tower. She was not wrong. For the first 15 years, nobody bothered us. The developer who turned the dairy ground into Cedar Hollow in the early 2000s actually came up the hill, shook my hand on this very porch, and signed a service agreement so his new houses could pull fiber and power through my corridor and off my tower's relay. He understood what he was building next to. He read the deed before he broke ground. Because that is what you do when $300,000 depends on knowing where your lines run. That agreement is in the folder, too. His signature and mine, dated and clean. Everybody who built down there is connected to the valley through equipment that physically lives on my land, under a right that predates every shingle in that subdivision. The people who live there have no idea. Why would they? You flip a switch, the lights come on, you open a laptop, the internet works. Nobody walks the line back up the hill to see where it comes from. I do not hold that against them. A man should not have to think about his own utility corridor any more than he thinks about his own heartbeat. Still, somebody has to maintain it, climb it, splice it, and stand under it in an ice storm with sleet running down his collar. And for 34 years that somebody was paid to be me, and for 6 years after that, it was just me, for free, because it was mine. I knew every bolt on that tower. I knew which leg iced first in a north wind, and which junction box took on water in a hard rain. I had earned that steel twice over, once with a career and once with a deed. And a woman in clean sneakers was about to try to teach me that it was hers. The documentation habit was Carol's before it was mine. She kept the household the way I kept a job site. Every receipt, every warranty, every letter that mattered, in folders with the year on the tab in those block capitals she swore by. When she got sick, the medical paper alone filled the drawer, and her, keeping it straight to the end, was the only control either of us had over a thing that respected no control at all. After she passed, I kept the habit because it was hers, and then I kept it because it worked. A labeled folder is a quiet thing. It does not argue. It does not get angry. It just sits there being true and waits, and on the day you need it, it is exactly as true as it was the day you filed it. People underestimate that. Dana Pruitt underestimated it for 2 solid years. Then Dana Pruitt got elected president of the Homeowners Association. I first met Dana on a Tuesday in the spring 2 years ago when she drove her white SUV with the vanity plate up my access road, parked it across my gate so I could not get my truck out, and walked up to my porch with a clipboard and a younger man in an HOA polo trailing behind her. She introduced herself as the president of Cedar Hollow and told me she was conducting what she called a perimeter aesthetics review. I had never heard the phrase, neither had anybody, because she had made it up that week. Your property reads into our viewshed, she told me. The community has standards, and that structure, she nodded up at the tower, is a visual nuisance. We'll need it brought into compliance. I told her, level as I could, that the tower was not in Cedar Hollow, that my land had never been part of the association, and that the structure she was looking at was older than the road she drove in on. She smiled the way you smile at a child who has said something cute and wrong. She said the board would be in touch. She left a sheet of paper on my porch rail. It was a notice of aesthetic violation, with a fine schedule attached. $40 a day, until the nuisance was abated. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice. I took the sheet inside, dated it, and started a folder. That is the first thing the trade taught me. You do not fix the outage by yelling at the storm. You log it, you document the fault, and you build the record. That was incident 1. That night, Eli asked me why the lady had parked across our gate. I told him some people decide they are in charge of things they do not understand, and the only thing to do is keep good notes. He nodded. Like that made sense and went back to his homework. Carol would have liked that, he asked. The fines came monthly after that, printed on Cedar Hollow letterhead, slid into my mailbox at the bottom of the hill. I never paid one. You cannot fine a man for a structure on land you have no jurisdiction over, and I knew it, and more importantly, I had the paper to prove it. And still I did not show her the paper. People asked me later why I waited. The answer is that I had been an outage engineer for 34 years, and the first rule of a hard fault is, you do not act on what you think the problem is. You confirm it. You let it show itself fully before you cut power to fix it. Dana had not shown herself fully, yet she would. The second escalation came that summer. It started with a phone call on a Saturday morning while I was changing the oil in the truck with my arms black to the elbow. A man named Doug something, a contractor I had never hired, asking in a friendly voice when he could come survey my ridge for what he called the Community Line Relocation Project. I wiped my hands on a rag and asked him to say that again. He said it again. Community Line Relocation Project. I told him there was no project and no relocation, and that he had the wrong number. He laughed a little, the way a man laughs when he thinks you are the one who is confused, and he said no, he had the right number. He had been hired by the Cedar Hollow Board to plan moving the utility corridor off my land and down the public right-of-way along the county road. I set the rag down on the fender. I told him the corridor could not be moved because it was recorded permanent and load-bearing for his clients' own houses, and that every home in Cedar Hollow drew its service through equipment that physically sat on my ridge. There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers. I asked him plainly who at the board had told him the corridor could be relocated. He went quiet for a second, and then he said the president had assured him my parcel was, and I am quoting him exactly, because I wrote it on the inside cover of the folder that same night, functionally part of the development. There it was again, that word, functionally. As if saying a thing often enough out loud in a meeting room makes a 60-year-old deed quietly rewrite itself in a drawer at the county recorder's office. I thanked Doug for his time. I told him that before he billed Cedar Hollow for a single hour of survey work, he might want to pull the title on my parcel himself, because he was about to design a relocation of something that legally could not be relocated, and a contractor who builds a plan on land he does not control does not get paid when the plan dies. He thanked me back, slower now, and I never heard from him again. I hope he pulled the title. He would have been the only person in this whole story who did it before it was too late. That was incident 4, if you count the 2 fine letters in between. And I did. By the fall, the binder had a tab system. Eli built me a little spreadsheet that auto-totaled the fines she claimed I owed. We watched the number climb together at the kitchen table like it was a scoreboard for a game. Only one of us knew the rules to. $11,000 by Thanksgiving. None of it collected. None of it collectible. I want you to hold on to that number, because at the end of this there is another number that sits right next to it, and the distance between the two is the whole point. Now here is where I should tell you what I started to figure out, because I did not understand the real shape of it for almost a year. Dana Pruitt was not just an officious woman with a clipboard and a grudge about my tower. Dana's husband, Mark Pruitt, ran a development company, and that company had quietly optioned the 200 acres of hayfield on the far side of my ridge, the last open ground in the valley, with plans for a second subdivision twice the size of Cedar Hollow. The only problem with their plan, the one engineering constraint they could not buy their way around, was that the new development needed a utility corridor, and the only viable corridor ran across my ridge, across my recorded easement. The one I controlled. They did not want my tower gone for the view. They wanted my tower gone and my corridor freed up so they could route their own infrastructure through it without paying me a dime or asking my permission. The aesthetic nuisance was theater. The real play was the land under the steel. I learned this in pieces, the way you trace a fault back along a line, and the man who handed me the first piece was somebody I did not expect. His name was Gary Hoke. He was on the Cedar Hollow board, a retired postal carrier. The kind of man who joins a board because he believes in showing up. He drove up my road one evening in his own car, not the association SUV, and he stood on my porch, turning his cap in his hands before he said anything. He told me he had voted for the fines because Dana told the board my structure was a safety hazard and a liability. Then, he told me he had pulled the meeting minutes himself and found a line item he was not supposed to see, a consulting payment from Mark Pruitt's company to the association's general fund, dated the same week Dana started the Perimeter Aesthetics Review. Gary did not understand all of it, yet he understood enough to know the math was wrong. He asked me if I knew anything. I told him I knew more than he did, and I poured him a coffee, and I added his visit to the folder. Incident, I had stopped numbering the small ones by then and started numbering only the ones that mattered. This one mattered. That was the first ally signal. I did not deploy anything. I filed it. The fines kept coming, $40 a day on paper, sliding into the mailbox at the bottom of the hill, in envelopes I had learned to recognize by the weight. Dana escalated to a registered letter from the association's attorney, threatening to place a lien on my property for the unpaid balance, by then over $14,000. A lien on land her organization had no claim to whatsoever. I took the letter to a real estate attorney in the county seat, a sharp, unhurried woman named Lena Cho, whose office was a converted house 2 blocks off the courthouse square with a space heater going and a wall of recorded plat books behind her desk. I laid my folder on her desk, and I did not say much. I had learned that the paper says it better than I do. She put on her glasses and read the deed, then the easement. Then she found the recording date, and she stopped and read it twice, once with her finger under the year 1961. She turned back to the lien threat and read that, and the whole time her face did the thing a good engineer's face does when the schematic finally makes sense, a small settling around the eyes. She looked up at me over her glasses and said the lien would not survive 10 minutes in front of a judge, that you cannot lien a parcel for violating rules that have never applied to it, and that the attorney who signed this threat had either not seen the deed or was hoping I never would. Then, she said, Dan, something that stuck with me. She said the interesting question was not whether they could win, because they plainly could not. The interesting question was why they kept pushing when they so obviously could not. I told her about Mark Pruitt's option 200 acres on the far side of my ridge. I watched her get very still, the way the room gets still when a load finally finds its true path to ground. She set her pen down. She said, "So it was never about the view." I said, "No." She said, "Write everything down, every letter, every call, every visit, the dates, the names, and do not, under any circumstances, let them provoke you into doing anything yourself. Do not touch their equipment. Do not raise your voice on their property. Do not give them one frame of you doing anything but keeping records, because the moment they cross a real line, and they will, you will not have to lift a finger. The line itself will do the work." I told her that sounded like the way I had run outages for 34 years. She said, "Then you already know how this ends. You just have to wait for the fault to show itself." I went home, and I told Eli we were going to be patient a while longer. He was 16 by then. He asked me if we were going to lose the land. I told him no. I told him his mother and I bought this ridge with our eyes open, and there was a piece of paper in the folder, older than both of us, that said so. He asked if he could see it. I showed him. He read the whole easement at the kitchen table, slow the way I taught him to read a schematic, and when he finished he said, "So they need us, and they don't even know it." I said, "That is exactly right." He grinned, Carol's grin on his face. I had to look away for a second. Spring again. 2 years now since the first clipboard visit. And this is where Dana crossed the line that Lena had told me was coming. I came home from town on a Thursday afternoon to find a crew of 2 men on ladders along my fence line drilling into my cedar posts, mounting weatherproof cameras and aiming them back up my own access road at my house and my gate, not at the public road below. At me, at the porch where Eli does his homework. Dot was at the bottom of the drive barking herself, hoarse, hackles up, planted in the gravel like she meant to hold the line by herself. I parked the truck, and I got out slow. The taller of the 2 men came down off his ladder and met me with a clipboard, polite enough, and said they were installing community security monitoring underboard authorization. I asked, "Level, to see the authorization." He handed me a work order on Cedar Hollow letterhead, signed at the bottom in blue ink by Dana Pruitt. I read it twice, standing right there in the drive. It described my fence posts, the cedar posts I set myself the second summer carol, and I owned the place as community-adjacent infrastructure. It directed the cameras to feed back to the association's monitoring system over the existing fiber line. It was dated that morning. Her signature was a confident thing, all loops, the signature of a woman who had never once been told no, and meant it. I want to stop here, because this is the moment the whole thing turned, and most people miss why. For 2 years, Dana had been making claims, letters, fines, a contractor, a lawyer's threat, words in meeting rooms. Claims are smoke. You cannot ground a fault on smoke. Now, finally, she had done something specific and physical, and provably hers. She had crossed my recorded boundary, bolted her equipment to my posts, aimed surveillance at my 17-year-old son, and she had put her name on the order in blue ink. That was not a claim anymore. And here is the part she truly did not understand, the part nobody on her side had thought to check. The fiber line. Those cameras fed back through, the line her own work order named in plain print, the line carrying her surveillance, footage down the hill to her monitoring station, ran through my tower. Through equipment that sat on my land under my easement that I owned outright, that I had climbed and serviced with my own hands in every season for 6 years. She had built her operation to watch me on top of the one piece of infrastructure in this entire valley that I controlled completely. She had run her wire through my hands and asked me to hold it for her. I did not touch the cameras. I want to be clear about that because it is the discipline that won this. I did not climb a ladder and rip them down. I did not cut a wire. Instead, I did 3 things, in order, calm as a man closing up a shop. First, I photographed every camera, every fence post, every drill hole, and the work order, and Eli backed the photos up to 2 drives. Second, I called Lena Cho and read her the work order over the phone, and I heard her pen stop on the line, and she said, "He signed it," in a voice like a door clicking shut. Third, I drove to the county recorder's office the next morning, and I pulled, for the price of a copy fee, the full chain of title and easement records certified, so that what was true on my workbench was now also true on county letterhead. Then I made one phone call I had been saving for 2 years. The tower and its relay equipment carried not just Cedar Hollow service, but a licensed point-to-point microwave link I maintained under a federal license, a license tied to me personally as the equipment operator issued under my name. Aiming unauthorized equipment into a federally licensed link, and routing third-party data through licensed relay infrastructure without the operator's authorization is not a homeowners association matter. It is a federal one. I did not threaten anybody with that. I simply documented that the cameras were feeding through my licensed relay, saved it, and filed it. The trap was not something I built. It was something Dana walked into and then bolted herself to with her own signature. That night, Eli sat with me on the porch and asked if the cameras meant they could watch us. I told him they could try, but that every frame they recorded was traveling through equipment that belonged to us, and that sometimes the best thing you can do with a trap is let the other person finish setting it. He thought about that. Then he asked if Mom would have told me to take them down anyway. I said probably, and that she also would have made me write down the date first. He laughed. Dot put her head on his knee. The cameras blinked their little red lights at us all night, and I slept fine. Over the next 6 weeks, Dana got bolder because nothing I did fought back. And to a person like Dana, silence reads as fear. The newsletter came first. Gary Hoke drove up my road on a Sunday and laid it on my kitchen table without a word, the way you set down something that embarrasses you to be holding. It was a full-color community bulletin, and a third of the front was given over to what she called the Ridge situation. She described the holdout on the Ridge as a safety risk and an obstacle to community improvement. She named me. She named my parcel by its road number. She told 200 households that I was the reason their dues might rise that year, that one stubborn man above the valley was holding the whole community hostage over a rusted eyesore. I read it twice. Eli read it over my shoulder, and his jaw went tight in a way I did not like to see on a 16-year-old. I told him to go ahead and be angry for about a minute, and then to help me scan it and date it because angry does not go in the folder. The scan does. Then she held a public meeting in the Cedar Hollow clubhouse, and Gary went and took notes for me because Lena had told me to stay out of every room I was not legally required to be in. Gary said Dana stood at the front under the projector and told a full room that my structure would be removed by the end of summer, one way or another, and that the Ridge was. And I will give you the third time she said it because she said it in 3 different rooms across these 2 years, functionally part of our jurisdiction. She had a contractor on retainer. She said she had a date circled. She told the whole neighborhood it was happening. And the whole neighborhood believed her, because she was the one with the microphone, and I was just a name in a bulletin who never showed up to defend himself. What she did not have was the deed. She had never read it. In 2 years of letters, fines, attorneys, surveys, phone campaigns, cameras bolted to my fence, and a public crusade with my name and my road number in it, Dana Pruitt had never once spent $4.20 at the county recorder's office to read the single document that governed the land she was trying to seize. She had a contractor, a lawyer, a husband with a development company, and a clubhouse full of people who trusted her, and not one of them had pulled the title. Lena had been right. The interesting question was never whether they could win. It was how far they would commit, in writing and in public and under oath, before the floor gave out from under all of them at once. The reckoning came at the County Planning Commission. Mark Pruitt's company had to file for preliminary plat approval on the new 200-acre development, and that filing was public, and it included their proposed utility plan. Lena saw it before I did. She called me on a Monday morning. Her voice had a careful flatness to it that I had learned meant she had found something good. She said, "You need to be in that room Wednesday evening and bring the folder, the whole folder, and let me do the talking." The utility plan for the new subdivision, she told me, showed the corridor running straight across my ridge, across my recorded easement, drawn as though it were unencumbered public ground. They had designed their entire project on top of land they did not control, and they had filed it with the county, under oath, with a licensed engineer's stamp on every sheet. Dana was listed as the community liaison. Mark was the applicant. On Wednesday, they sat together at the front table in good clothes, a leather portfolio between them, looking like people who had already won. I sat in the back row with Eli beside me. 17 now, in a collared shirt he had ironed himself, and the folder on my lap with Carol's block letters facing up. Lena sat to my right and did not say a word to me the whole time we waited, because she had told me in the parking lot that the document would speak and that the worst thing either of us could do was get ahead of it. We listened to 2 zoning variances and a fence dispute, and then they called the plat. When the commission opened public comment on the plat, Lena stood and introduced herself as counsel for the owner of the Ridge parcel, and she asked the commission a single question. She asked whether the applicant's utility corridor crossed any recorded easement. The county's own staff engineer, a quiet man named Phil Ostrander, who had no stake in any of this, looked at his file and said he would need to check the title. Lena said she could save him the trouble, and she walked a certified copy of the easement and the chain of title to the clerk, and the clerk passed it up, and the room went quiet. In the particular way a room goes quiet when paper hits a table and everyone senses the weight of it before they understand it. Phil read it. He read the recording date out loud. 1961. He read the grant language, the permanent corridor, the relay rights, the maintenance obligation, the transfer with the land. Then he looked at Mark Pruitt and said plainly, without drama, that the proposed corridor crossed a recorded easement that predated the entire valley's development, and that the applicant did not control, that no plat could be approved routing infrastructure, and that, as drawn, the application could not proceed. Dana stood up. She could not help herself. She told the commission that the parcel was functionally part of the community and had been treated as such for years. Phil asked her if she had a recorded instrument supporting that. She said the board had passed resolutions. He said board resolutions do not amend recorded property rights. And he asked, not unkindly, whether anyone in the application had reviewed the title before filing. The silence answered him. Mark Pruitt was staring at the certified copy on the table like it had appeared out of the floor. That was the moment. There was no shouting from my side. I did not stand up. I did not say a word. I sat in the back with my son and let a man who had never met me read out a date from 1961 and watched 2 years of fines and letters and cameras and newsletters collapse into that one sentence about recorded property rights. Lena had been right about everything. The document spoke. I did not have to. Then she added the second number to mine. The commission, now alert, asked staff to review the existing Cedar Hollow service infrastructure, because if the easement holder controlled the corridor, the commission wanted to understand the current arrangement. And that is when it came out, on the record, that the entire existing subdivision was served through relay equipment on my parcel, under a license held in my name, that the association had recently mounted surveillance equipment on my fence and routed its data through my licensed relay without authorization, and that this was documented. The county attorney, who had wandered in halfway through, asked to keep a copy of everything. 11,000, then 14,000. In fines, Dana had tried to collect from me every dollar of it uncollected and uncollectible. Against that, one easement recorded 63 years before she printed her first violation notice. Point to both. Feel the gap. The consequences fell the way Lena said they would. Automatically, as the natural result of the Pruitt's own actions rather than anything I did to them. The plat application was denied that same afternoon. On the record, the commissioners not even needing to deliberate long, once the easement was in front of them. A corridor across land you do not control is not a thing a commission can approve, no matter how good the engineering stamps look. Mark Pruitt's company had spent by the reporting in the local paper the following week somewhere north of $300,000, optioning the 200 acres and engineering a development that could not be built without a corridor he did not control and now could never get. Because the man who controlled it had 2 years of documented harassment in a soft-cornered folder, his own son's homework, framed in the crosshairs of cameras Dana had signed for, and no reason on this earth to grant consent to the people who had put him there. They had needed one thing from me, the only thing, and they had spent 2 years making sure I would never give it. The option had a deadline. The deadline came. The land deal died on the calendar, quietly, the way these things actually die, not with a bang, but with a date passing, and a phone not ringing. The association's own attorney, the same one who had signed the lien threat, took one look at the unauthorized cameras feeding through a federally licensed relay and the certified easement now sitting in a county file, and advised the board in writing to remove the equipment immediately and to rescind every fine and notice ever issued against my parcel. Gary Hoke called me the night before the vote and asked if I wanted anything said on my behalf. I told him no. I told him the paper had said all of it already. He made the motion to rescind himself, all $14,000 in fines they had never been able to collect, and to order Dana's cameras off my fence within 10 days. He told me later he had never enjoyed a vote so much in his life, that he had joined that board to show up for his neighbors and had finally gotten to do it. Dana Pruitt resigned the presidency before the next meeting. Not out of grace. The newsletter she had sent naming me as a safety risk, the public meeting where she promised my tower would be gone by summer, the work order she had signed with her own hand directing cameras onto land she had never owned, all of it sat now in a county file with a raised seal, public record, anyone's to read. And the same household she had told to fear the man on the ridge read in the same local paper that the holdout up the hill held a recorded right older than every house in Cedar Hollow, and had been right the entire time, and had never once raised his voice about it. She did not get voted out. There was simply nothing left for her to preside over, and she knew it, and she left. The cameras came down on a Wednesday. Eli and I watched the crew unbolt them from the posts. Same crew, sheepish this time. They filled the drill holes with my own caulk because I asked them to, and they did not want any more trouble. When the last one came off the post by the gate, Dot trotted down the drive and sat in the gravel where she had barked herself hoarse 2 months before, satisfied like she had personally seen to it. I walked up to the meadow that evening, up to the flat stone I cut myself, and I stood there a while in the last of the light. From there you can see the tower against the sky, the same steel that has stood on that high point since 1963, and below it, the valley full of lights, every one of them running through the corridor Carol and I bought, with our eyes open. I did not say anything out loud. I am not built that way, and I stood there until the tower was just a black line against the blue, and I thought she would have liked how it ended. Quiet. No yelling. Just the paper, and the date, and the land, still ours. Eli starts engineering school in the fall. He told me last week he wants to keep the tower license in the family when he is old enough to hold it. I told him it would be his someday. The land and the steel and the folder both. He asked if he could keep the folder on his own workbench when that day came. I said yes. Carol's block letters on the tab, and his hand on it now. That is the only inheritance that ever mattered to me. Here is the lesson, plain as I can make it. because this is the part I actually want you to take with you. If you own land, read your deed. All of it. The boring parts, the easements and the exceptions and the old recording dates. Nobody mentions a closing. Walk your boundaries with the survey in your hand and know where your lines really are, not where your neighbor says they are. When somebody with a clipboard tells you that your property is functionally part of anything, go to the county recorder, pay the few dollars, and pull the certified records yourself, because a board resolution cannot amend a recorded right, and a loud voice cannot rewrite a deed. Keep a folder. Date everything. Photograph the work order, back it up twice, and never let anger make you do the thing they are waiting for you to do. Because the moment they put their overreach in writing and sign it, the document you already hold does all the work for you. The quiet, careful owner with clean paper beats the loud one with a golf cart every single time. That is not luck. That is just keeping records. If you have got a story like this, a clipboard, a fence line, a fight you won, or one you are still in the middle of, put it in the comments. I read them. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe and stick around, because there are more of these than you would believe. Next time I will tell you about the woman who tried to charge a rancher for the rainwater that crossed his own land, and the 100-year-old water right that turned her whole scheme upside down in a single afternoon at the state engineer's office. Take care of your land. Read your paper. I will see you on the next one.